Story 1. The first marks appeared on my left shoulder. Small, circular, with the texture of aged skin and the tone of irritated flesh. At first, I thought it was an allergy. I changed my detergent, stopped using perfume, switched the sheets. Nothing worked. More started to appear on my neck, my ribs, my thighs. None of them itched. None of them hurt. But all of them seemed like they wanted to grow. I went to the university clinic. They gave me ointments and said it was stress. A dermatologist suggested I avoid emotionally tense environments. I didn't mention that 2 months ago, Kyle broke up with me over text. That after 3 years together, he just stopped responding. And that, coincidentally, his ex-girlfriend had moved back to town that same week. I began tracking where and when the marks appeared. It wasn't random. The shapes changed. Some were long, thin like cuts. Others branched out like twigs. They always showed up at dawn, disappeared at night, and returned stronger the next day. I took pictures, created folders with dates. I stared into the mirror, not searching for beauty, but for patterns. It felt like I was becoming a document in progress, a code printed on skin. I hid everything under long clothes, even in the heat. No one else saw it. Not yet. But I knew. This wasn't just my body reacting. It was something else. Something external. Something placed. While looking through old files for a receipt, I found a folder labeled Kyle on my external hard drive. Inside, among academic files and copies of diplomas, was a subfolder named SG. I opened it without hesitation. There were photos, all of her, Samantha Greaves. She and Kyle at parties, on walks, at birthdays. But her face was always blurred. In some, half of it was missing. In others, it looked digitally erased. Yet the metadata of each image was original, never edited. There was also a text file, untitled, a list of 5 names with dates next to them. Mine was there, Rachel Monroe, 2 months ago. Her name appeared first, with a date from 4 years ago. The rest were strangers. I started researching, looked up Samantha on social media, school records, anything I could find. Jefferson High had an alumna with that name, but no photos. An archived page from a 2011 blog mentioned a girl with strange behavior and an obsession with rituals. No last name, but it referenced a grandmother with the same address Samantha lives at today. I printed the least distorted photo and taped it to my bedroom wall. I needed to look at it every day, not out of anger, out of control, like keeping a dangerous animal behind glass. If I didn't know where she was, she could be anywhere. While hosing down the driveway, I noticed the soil around the backyard tree looked different. The color was darker, the texture looser, like it had been recently disturbed. The grass grew unevenly there, as if something beneath the surface was stopping the roots. I grabbed a garden trowel and started digging. The surface gave way easily. In less than 30 minutes, I found a black cloth tied with twine. It was damp, with a strong smell of vinegar and something else sweet, like fermented fruit. Inside, there was a glass vial sealed with thick wax. I opened it. The stench rose thick in the air. 3 rusted needles floated in a dark liquid, tangled with strands of hair. At the bottom, folded tightly, was a hardened piece of paper. I unrolled it. My name, Rachel Monroe, written in red ink, in precise handwriting. The first vowel was punctured. Burn marks surrounded the edges. I went back inside and scrubbed everything with bleach. The smell clung to my hands, the sink, the drain. I placed the vial in a shoebox and walked to Miss Lorraine's house. She was known in the neighborhood for handling things that can't be explained. She held the vial, studied it for a few minutes, and told me it was a jar spell, meant to drain, to bind, created with intent, and that it was still active. She told me to come back in 3 days. Bring salt, soil, and something only I could offer. The next day, the marks rearranged themselves. They were no longer random. The lines formed perfect angles, like someone was drawing on my skin with invisible rulers. They weren't wounds, but they looked like incisions. I photographed each one, created a new folder with the images, date, location, time, everything documented. I began printing them. I lost my appetite. Everything tasted metallic, even water. The skin near my hairline started to peel. My eyes sank deeper into my face. The house smelled like wet cloth, even with the windows open. I found strands of hair on my pillow that weren't mine, darker, thicker. I shattered the small bathroom mirror on impulse. I wasn't sure why. I just needed to stop seeing myself. I went to the pharmacy to buy gauze and ointment for the fresh scratches. I saw a woman at the checkout, gray coat, hair tied back. A scar behind her ear, the same curve Samantha had in one of the photos. She paid in cash and walked out without looking around. I went home and burned the printed photos, flushed the ashes down the kitchen sink. The shoebox with the vial remained untouched, but felt heavier. I slept in my coat, woke up with a dry throat and a new mark on my side. 3 parallel lines, cold to the touch. I found Samantha's grandmother's address among old papers Kyle had left behind. It was an old wooden house with peeling paint at the end of a dead-end street. The gate was ajar. I rang the bell, but no one answered. I let myself in, told myself I was looking for a missing cat. A lie I repeated until I halfway believed it. In the backyard, there was a small room with sliding doors. I pushed one open. The smell hit me first, old lavender mixed with damp soil. Candles burned on cracked saucers. Low shelves held dozens of glass jars. Each contained something different. Pieces of cloth, fingernails, tiny teeth, dark grains, hair tied with red ribbon. Photos were taped to the wall. Young women at different stages of life. In all of them, the eyes were crossed out with a black marker. A pattern emerged, scribbled dates in the corners of the photos, like expiration dates. Some had been crossed out twice. Others marked with small symbols in the lower corner. Among the images, I found one of me. The same photo Kyle took of me at a birthday party. My face was painted over in black, with an arrow pointing to my chest. I stepped on something. A jar tipped over and shattered. The liquid spilled toward my foot. The smell was acidic, nearly unbearable. I heard soft footsteps approaching down the hallway. I ran out through the back without looking behind me. Took me 3 days to get that smell off my skin. Miss Lorraine handed me an envelope with handwritten instructions. She said only that it was for protection. I followed every line like a medical prescription. I bought coarse salt, dug beneath my bedroom window, mixed it with soil from the garden, and placed a lock of my hair that had fallen out during my shower. I buried it all with my hands. My nails turned black. The smell of the earth made me nauseous. That night, I pricked my fingertip with a sewing needle. Let the blood drip onto a circle of salt drawn on the kitchen floor. I waited. Nothing happened. The night passed, but the marks changed. The skin now showed hardened areas like thick bark. The lines weren't just shapes anymore. They were complete symbols. Triangles, spirals, inverted crosses. The tip of my tongue went numb for hours. I started spitting blood when brushing my teeth. I found grains of rice at the entrance to my room, even though I didn't have any in the house. Scratch marks under the bed. The windows no longer shut properly. I began locking everything with chairs propped up against the doors. The night before the full moon, I woke up to find the jar open on the floor. The liquid was gone. I took it to the backyard and poured alcohol over it. The glass cracked. A dry smell rose in the air. The sound was hollow like a sigh. For a few seconds, my nose bled for no reason. I moved to a different city the following week. Took only the essentials. Left the rest behind. My skin was clear. The marks had vanished as if they'd never existed. Only the texture remained, rougher in some places, like a memory carved in low relief. In the new house, I threw away the mirrors. Kept only one, small, turned to face the wall. I installed new locks. Tried to build a routine. Work, groceries, reading. At night, I drank tea with honey, even though I didn't like it. Forced myself to sleep with sedatives. I wanted to forget, but the body doesn't forget. I received a white envelope with no return address. Inside, a newspaper clipping. A woman hospitalized in a state of extreme apathy, with marks all over her body and a history of mental disturbances. Neighboring city. No identification. Along with the clipping, a single strand of hair. Mine. I tore through the house. The shoebox was exactly where I'd left it. Empty. Burned. Intact. The clothes were clean. Nothing out of place. But in the desk drawer, I found the printed photo of Samantha. The one I had burned. Charred edges and all. Folded in half. Sitting there. I didn't cry. I tore the envelope, ripped the photo, poured alcohol on my hands and lit all the burners on the stove. The night was warm, but I slept in a coat. Today my body is clean, but when I pass the bathroom window I still avoid the mirror. I've seen my reflection smile when I wasn't smiling. Story 2. When I agreed to work night shifts as a rideshare driver, I wasn't expecting peace and quiet. I just wanted to avoid the daytime. Ever since my mother died, any kind of light felt aggressive. Morning sounds irritated me, like they existed just to remind me I was still alive, even when I didn't want to be. Night rides had their own kind of emptiness. Drunk people, silent people, people crying without meaning to. Passengers who disappeared after the ride like they'd never existed. I felt comfortable there between the distance and the anonymity. That's why I noticed Alma. She didn't seem to belong to the city or to that hour. She wore white, old-fashioned clothes, her hair pinned tightly, and held a worn Bible in her lap. The request came through at 2:43 a.m. Name: Alma F. The pickup spot was a deserted intersection where even cell service usually failed. The destination was even stranger. Something called New Light Temple, Route 89. The app didn't show it on the map, but GPS traced a route nearly 30 minutes long. A straight shot into the desert. Alma didn't say a word, and yet, it felt like she was speaking to me the whole time. There was something in the air, in the way she breathed. A rhythm, like she somehow understood the pain I tried to bury. I dropped Alma off at what remained of a wooden chapel, hidden among dry shrubs and red sand. The windows were boarded from the inside, but there was light coming from within, not electric. Something more amber, like tall candles or oil lanterns. Alma stepped out slowly, like someone returning home after a long time. On the drive back, I noticed the smell in the car had changed. It wasn't sweat or perfume. It was like old lavender, mixed with wet paper and rusted iron. The next night, Alma appeared again. Same time, same place, same silence. And again, 3 nights, 4, 5, short rides, always to the same dead spot in the desert. On the 6th day, the passengers after her began canceling their rides. The app was still active, but no one else would get in the car. As if they could smell something I could no longer hide. I thought about deleting the app. I thought about blocking Alma. But something about her kept pulling me back. Not curiosity, not fear, something else. Maybe it was the way she looked at me through the rearview mirror. Like she saw something I didn't want to remember. I waited for the next day. Drove to the final coordinates of her rides, under full daylight. The place looked like a sketch of what once was sacred. The chapel dissolved in the desert heat, surrounded by dry stones and a silence thicker than air. The window boards were marked with symbols, not just random scratches. Spirals overlaid on one another, like crooked eyes carved with a blade. There was something etched into the ground beneath the main entrance too. An imperfect 9-pointed star, nearly erased by the sand but still visible enough to disturb me. Inside, the pews were overturned. The altar still stood, a slab of dark stone, with marks at each corner, like objects had been driven into it forcefully. An inverted candelabrum rested above it, and on top, what looked like strips of children's fabric, hardened with age. The smell was of something burned and stored away for decades. Rancid resin, wet wood, melted wax. On the back wall, someone had taped a paper with old, yellowing tape. It was a faded pamphlet, with curved letters that read, "New Light Temple, Surrender and Redemption." At the bottom, nearly erased, was a handwritten phrase. "What is willingly offered returns doubled." I walked back to my car with a heavy head. The sun hadn't set yet, but the sky looked dull. When I opened the glove compartment to grab my sunglasses, I found a brown envelope. I had no memory of putting anything there. Inside, a folded sheet of paper with 2 columns of names, 17 in total. Some were crossed out in red ink, others marked with a spiral symbol beside them. The last name at the bottom of the second column was mine. Next to it, nothing. While reading, the radio turned on by itself. The static was subtle, like breathing. I tried to turn it off, but the button didn't respond. The screen flickered between frequency 666 and a strange code, RET89 LM.A. I looked up at the rearview mirror. My reflection was there, but something behind me was moving. Not a body, a shape, like a reflection of light with no source. And then, for a second, something whispered. Not a clear voice, just the impression of a name. Alma. Not as a name, as a sentence. I spent days trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was all exhaustion, grief, the lack of a routine. But even sleeping early, cutting out caffeine, the humming persisted, like a whisper behind my eyes. I searched local newspapers. In an old article from 1998, I read about a fire at an evangelical camp. 2 brothers burned to death. Their mother, Alma Franklin, survived. The piece was brief, but said she led alternative spiritual gatherings. A month later, she was excommunicated for reverse offering doctrine. I dug deeper. The spiral symbol, the 9-pointed star, the temple's name, all connected to a fringe cult that preached the transfer of pain to hidden entities in exchange for preservation of what you love. The kind of promise that only draws in the desperate. Like me, in the bathroom mirror I found spirals drawn in something oily. My fingers trembled. I remembered an old conversation with my mother, months before she died. She said she kept dreaming of someone sitting in the back seat of my car, smiling with eyes that weren't eyes. At the time, I thought it was just the cancer spreading to her mind. That night, Alma didn't appear, and for a moment it felt like relief. A normal night, no rides, no lavender scent, just me, the city, and the soft background noise of the TV. But out of habit, I opened the app and saw her name. Scheduled. 2:43 a.m. destination. Retreat 89. I went, because I wanted to end it. Or maybe because part of me wanted to understand. Maybe even belong. Be part of something bigger, even if it was dark. Alma was waiting at the corner. New clothes, but the same eyes. She got in slowly. The smell in the car was stronger now. Not lavender, but something damp, warm, like her skin was giving off smoke. At the temple, there was more light. The altar had been cleaned. Someone was preparing it for the ritual. There were bodies seated along the edges of the nave, all dressed in white, blindfolded, with symbols painted on their chests, spirals that turned inward. Two boys stood beside Alma, pale, tall, eyes too dark, too deep. They didn't smile. They didn't blink. Alma touched my arm and my legs gave out. They laid me on the stone with care, like I was too fragile to resist. Her necklace began to glow faintly, a pulsing light, like a heartbeat. In that moment I realized, maybe I had come willingly. Maybe the ritual needed that. The air around the altar thickened. Hot. Breathing felt like inhaling smoke. The ceiling pulsed with Alma's necklace. Each candle flickered in rhythm. The walls creaked. She touched my chest with her fingers. With blood from her sliced palm, she drew a symbol across my sternum. No longer a simple spiral. A variation, a continuous knot, like a cycle with no beginning. The living ink pulsed with my skin. Then Alma raised a dark blade. The metal looked ancient, stained from the inside out. She pressed it between my ribs. It didn't hurt at first, just heat crawling under the skin. Blood ran down into a clay bowl on the floor, where it evaporated before reaching the bottom. The smoke in the room thickened, and within it, faces. Children, teens, adults, all with empty eyes like old dolls. The two boys behind Alma vanished. In their place, two silhouettes made of liquid shadow, drifting like loose skin. The stone beneath me began to crack, pulsed with the wound. Part of me wanted to scream, part wanted to stay, part felt peace. But when the bowl filled, Alma whispered, "Now he is inside." I woke up in an empty lot. The sky was pale, my body covered in dust and dirt. I was naked. My hands were cut. The scars formed symbols I had never seen, except in Alma's eyes. The spirals on my chest still burned. I walked toward the road. A truck driver picked me up and took me to the hospital. I was kept under observation for 3 days. Diagnosis: dehydration, delirium, psychological trauma. No mention of the marks, not even the burn beneath my sternum, which kept darkening. The police investigated the location. All they found were ruins, as if the chapel had collapsed years ago. No signs of recent use. No record of a temple. No Alma F. No Franklin. Nothing. Months later, I tried to move on. Moved to a new city. New jobs. Therapy. The scars changed over time, some faded, others grew. When I showered, I felt like there were more of them than before. One day, I received a letter with no return address. Heavy paper, blue ink. "Thank you for your offering. The next one has already begun." That night, I noticed a new detail in the mirror. In the fogged glass, behind the reflection of my face, there was something in the back seat. It didn't move, but it was smiling. And on the seat, perfectly aligned, were 7 small cloth dolls, all hand-stitched, all with eyes made from the same dark button. And one of them, the one in the center, was wearing my necklace. Story 3. The road felt like it was looping. Same leaning trees, same gray sky, same damp smell of mud and gasoline. I was following the only concrete lead left about my sister, an isolated spiritual group called Prayer of the Flame, whose activities had abruptly ceased months earlier. The GPS had died about half an hour before I arrived. The dirt road led to a wooden arch with a faded, crooked inscription: Chapel Roanoke. No signs of technology, no cars, just tilted wooden houses, laundry hanging on warped clotheslines, and children playing silently with cloth dolls. A group of people approached slowly, smiling as if they'd been expecting me. Among them, a woman in white stepped forward with a serene expression, her graying hair tied in a low bun. She extended her hands and welcomed me with a long, quiet embrace. She smelled of dried lavender and resin, The village felt frozen in time. There were no dogs, no music, no mechanical sounds. Only soft voices, distant hymns, and the crackling of burning candles. When I asked about my sister, they led me to one of the simple houses. The room was tidy, minimalist. On the bed was an envelope with familiar handwriting. Inside, a sheet of paper folded in four, written by hand. "She is at peace." No signature, just that vague, final message as if it explained everything. I tried confronting the residents, but their smiles were too soft, as if every question had already been answered long before it was asked. That night, I was invited to the communal dinner. We sat at long wooden tables outdoors. Everyone prayed holding hands. The words sounded rehearsed. Vague phrases about purification, silence, and fire. The wine they served was dark, thicker than usual. It had a slightly metallic taste. I didn't swallow. The man sitting next to me was older, expressionless face, calloused hands. Before getting up, he ran his finger through the dust on the table and drew a spiral, 2 loops with a dot in the center. No one else seemed to notice. When I looked again, he was gone. Later that night, I entered the prayer house. The place was simple, crude benches, candles stuck to the walls with melted wax, and a floor of packed earth. But something was buried there, a low, constant vibration, like something was breathing beneath the ground. Under the altar, something shimmered. I knelt. It was my sister's bracelet, covered in soot. It smelled faintly of burnt leather, sweet and wrong. The ceremony began with the villagers forming a circle around the prayer house. No one spoke. They walked slowly, eyes closed, humming hymns like they were breathing through their throats. Mother Justine stepped into the center, holding a bowl of dark wine. She moved through the circle, offering the chalice to each person. When she reached me, her eyes lingered. There was expectation there, a kind of silent recognition. The wine was thick. It didn't smell like grapes. It had something metallic, something alive. I took a sip. The world tilted just slightly. The sounds around me grew heavier. The words they chanted, harmless before, now echoed hollow, like they were being spoken from inside a tunnel. When I opened my eyes, the circle had dissolved. I didn't remember closing them. Time had slipped. The night was deeper. I was alone inside the prayer house. Back in my room, my muscles ached like I'd been walking for hours. I sat on the bed, and something cracked beneath my feet. I bent down. Under the bed was a half-melted candle embedded in a dark, dried mass that looked disturbingly like flesh. That night, I dreamed of my sister, but not how she was as an adult. She was 8, wearing her childhood church dress, her hair in braids. She was running through a forest of bare trees, holding a lit candle in both hands. Behind her, a house was on fire. When I called her name, she turned to me and whispered something, though her lips never moved. Still, I understood. She promised she'd bring me back. I woke up drenched in cold sweat. The house was utterly silent, as if the sounds of the world had been shut off. I stepped outside and walked to the village's edge. There, among twisted trees, I saw small totems made of bones tied with burnt ribbons. Pieces of fabric with hand-stitched words, all hanging upside down. Each one had a spiral burned into it. Jacob, the man who drew the spiral on the table, was gone. No longer among the villagers. His room was empty, his bed too neatly made. Inside the prayer house, hidden behind the altar, I found a notebook. The cover was made of leather. The pages, yellowed and numbered. My sister was entry number 68. On the final line, still blank, there was only this, 77. My number. The next morning, I gave up trying to leave. The bridge was buried in thick mud, and my car engine only sputtered in protest. It was as if the village had closed in around me, absorbing every possible exit. I pretended to accept the faith, participated in the rites, repeated the prayers. Mother Justine seemed pleased with my spiritual openness. She told me that some spirits resist, but the flame always prevails. They began treating me with reverence. The villagers called me Son of the Vigil. I could see it in their eyes, the fervor, the expectation, like they were waiting for something monumental. The nights were always too quiet, as if the village was holding its breath. In a corner of the chapel, I found a small, makeshift altar. It held personal objects, earrings, photographs, fragments of children's clothing, and among them a stained, scorched piece of fabric. It was my sister's dress. Hand-stitched into the lining, in faded red thread, was the number 68. The following night, Mother Justine announced that the circle was complete. She said the next offering would be made with light and faith. The narrator was led silently to a clearing behind the village, where a large circular stone structure had been built. 9 pillars, each one topped with an unlit candle. Gentle hands undressed him. They gave him a white tunic. The ground was covered in dry leaves mixed with melted wax. Symbols were drawn all around the structure. Spirals, inverted crosses, open eyes without eyelids. He lay down at the center. He accepted. He believed that by offering himself, the cycle would end. To burn in order to save others. Mother Justine appeared, holding a bowl of dark wine. She whispered ancient words. A flame was lit. The fire began to surround him, slowly crackling inward. The heat reached his skin. He closed his eyes. He waited, but the flame hesitated. It didn't advance. The candles began to extinguish, one by one, as if the very air had been pulled from the ritual. The wood stopped burning. The smoke withdrew. The fire rejected him. Mother Justine showed no surprise. She only smiled calmly and said, almost like a blessing, "You were marked for something else." When the last candle went out, the air thickened like burnt oil. He remained lying down, but something inside him shifted, not physically, but as if the rejection had awakened something far older. He stood. The clearing was empty. Mother Justine was gone. The stone structure began to tremble with a low, organic sound, like a throat preparing to vomit. He felt the ground vibrating. Inside the chapel, the Book of Offerings still sat on the altar. The pages were numbered, names crossed out in dried blood. He tore each one out, throwing them into the center of the nave. He ripped the candles from the ceiling. The smell of wax mixed with boiling skin spread through the sanctuary. The walls began to crack. Outside, the villagers remained kneeling, eyes closed, smiling, as if they already knew, as if they weren't allowed to react. The flames consumed the chapel with calculated slowness. The wood burned without smoke. It all seemed prepared for this. At the center of the fire, Mother Justine appeared. Still, arms open, face serene. Her white robe ignited slowly. She didn't scream. She smiled. The narrator woke up naked, lying on hard dirt, surrounded by dry bushes. There was no sign of the village. The sky was white. His body was covered in markings, spirals carved into his skin, some freshly healed, others still pulsing with a deep ache. He walked until he found a road. A truck driver took him to a rural hospital, where he was treated as just another case of delirium and exhaustion. They said he'd had a dissociative episode. The scars were classified as self-inflicted. No sign of the village, no temple, no record of Mother Justine. The weeks that followed were a blur. He lost his voice not from trauma, but from burns on his vocal cords. There was no external injury. It was as if something had dried out inside him. He tried to forget, avoided mirrors, avoided sleep, until the day he received the envelope. Thick paper, no return address. Inside, a handful of black soil and a handwritten note. Thank you for your offering. 9 remain. He tried not to think about it. But that night, he saw a video circulating on social media. A new spiritual retreat in Santa Fe. A woman in white, hair tied back, soft voice, introducing herself as Sister Mava. The necklace around her neck was the same. So were her eyes. And when the camera panned across the list of registered participants, he saw his own name near the bottom. Next to it, the number 78.